This story was told to me by the girl involved. Of course, I have changed names to protect identities. She's not my friend in any way, shape, or form. She was just telling the story and I happened to be in the general area, so I listened and asked questions. She consents to me sharing it if it does not reveal her identity. She is in the armed forces, and this happened while we were in tech school.
James had liked me since middle school. He was your typical nerd. Glasses, computer games, and Pokemon cards. I actually thought he was cute, but I was not interested in him like that. One day in the cafeteria someone threw a note onto my table, and when I asked who did it, one of his friends pointed at him. I just smiled and turned my attention back to my table. After school I chanced into him and his friends and smiled at him as I was walking past them. He said, "I didn't send that note." I said, "Excuse me? I didn't throw that paper." "Oh," I replied. "But I would like to be friends." He said. "Sure," I said shyly. For the next few months, we became closer and closer. We were both in grade 7 at the time and both 12. In grade 8 a new student joined our class. Michael. He was the typical bully type. Bigger and older than the rest of the class, very rough around the edges. I think he did some weed at the time, but I cannot say for sure. Initially, I hated him. He was extremely blunt, rude, obnoxious, and a complete jackass. And he picked on James incessantly, and he made me sick. As time went on, my hatred turned into curiosity. I wondered why he behaved the way he did towards the smaller kids, particularly boys. One day he was picking on a kid I had never talked to before. A glasses-wearing nerd who kept to himself almost all the time. He had him pinned to the ground about to kick the kid when I shouted from a distance, "Hey, stop it, you jerk, what is wrong with you?" He left the kid, walked up to me, and made a fist. He raised his hand at me but stopped midway and said, "You don't know me," and walked away. I thought about the incident all night and came to the conclusion that I was going to talk to him in the morning at school. The next day I walked up to him at lunch and said, "Tell me." "What?" he asked. "You said I didn't know you. Tell me about you." He looked at me as if I was a strange being for what seemed like forever, and then finally asked, "Why? I want to know why you pick on everyone so much. Why you are such a bully." He squints his eyes looking at me, reads me for a while and says, "Find me after school." I did. We talked for an hour or so before I left for home. He told me enough for me to have some sympathy for him. I decided to be friends with him. Partly so he will leave James alone, and also, I thought he was cool. The more I got to know Michael, the more I realized he needed me. And I found myself liking him a lot. I even managed to turn him and James into friends somewhat. In high school I kept in touch with Michael and James. James asked me out in senior year, but at this point I was sleeping with Michael and any romantic feelings I may have had for James had been transferred to Michael. He needed me. He was my very own broken guy to fix. I told James about my relationship with Michael. We both knew him well enough to at least agree he is not good for me. He became verbally abusive, and it was only a matter of time before it got physical. James said he would wait for as long as it takes. Honestly, I had known he liked me way before he told me. But when he didn't ask me out when I hoped he would, and Michael in the picture, I had moved on. I don't really believe I stopped liking him, but I wasn't ready to let my challenge go without some sort of win. If only I could get a James out of Michael with all the roughness, he would be the perfect boyfriend. Over the years Michael and I would break up a few times, and every time James would be there to help me through it. I would go right back when Michael would show some sort of change. I knew he loved me in his own way, but the level of uncertainty I got from him made me want him the more. Now on to the real story. The real reason I am telling this tale. It was a Tuesday afternoon. My job had slowed down a lot during COVID, and so I had so much time off. I took the day off to spend time with Michael. I hadn't seen him all week, and he seemed to be avoiding my calls. When I got to his place, I saw a car I had never seen before. Now Michael has some strange friends, so I assumed it must be one of them. I walked up the floor to his door, knocked several times with no answer. I was about to turn and leave after standing there for about 5 minutes when a woman moved the window seals and peeked out. She seemed to be covering herself with a comforter. "Oh hell no," I yelled as I started banging on the door. Seconds later Michael opens the door and walks out, blocking me from entering. This was not the first or second time I had caught him cheating, by the way. I threw my hand to slap him, but he caught it and said to not dare touch him. I was angry and devastated. I said all the awful things an angry woman could think of to him and told him we were done. I called James on my drive home to tell him what had happened, and he said he would be over after work. He managed to get off earlier than usual to come see me. On his drive to my place, he called me to comfort me while I was crying the whole time. About 20 minutes into the call, I heard him say, "Oh shit." And then I heard crashing sounds, and then the call cut. Long story short, a drunk driver ran into him on the highway while he was driving over to come see me. Both James and the driver, it turns out, were speeding, trying to overtake each other. James was pronounced dead on the scene. The nicest person I've ever known. Died trying to save me from a toxic boyfriend. And the worst part is I do not regret my decision to be with Michael.